Welcome to the educational research section of www.happynumbers.org. Today's video is dealing with role type classification of variables. Role type classification of variables. Again, I want to reiterate, sometimes I forget to mention where all this information that I'm presenting is coming from. It's coming from the Carnegie Mellon online initiative, and here is the URL. It's a wonderful website that teaches probability and statistics. Really great. If you're so inclined, you should visit it. Anyway, we're going to talk here about variables, and we're going to talk about the roles that variables fill and the type, and I'll explain that. So let's just take a look here. In most studies involving two variables, each of the variables assumes a role. Well, one role could be a response variable, and that's sort of the outcome of a study, and it's usually referred to as X. Or you could have the explanatory variable, or the variable that explains or predicts what is going to happen to the response variable. And that's usually referred to, I'm sorry, this is usually referred to as Y, and this is usually referred to as X. So we have response variables and explanatory variables. Let's look at, suppose there was a study was looking at the relationship between gender and test scores. Gender and test scores. Well, in this instance, gender is the explanatory variable because we're looking at whether the gender is can predict a difference in test scores between male and female. So gender is the explanatory variable, and the test scores would be the response variable. How about if we're looking at a study that looks at the type of light that a person slept with, type of night light that a person slept with, and nearsightedness. So type of light and whether the person was nearsighted or not. Well, the type of light would be the explanatory variable, and nearsightedness would be the response variable. Whether the person was nearsighted or not was dependent on whether what type of night light the person had. Well, let's take up some practice looking at these response and explanatory variables. In a study looking at the number of calories in a hot dog and the type of hot dog, beef, meat, or poultry, what is the explanatory variable and what's the response variable? I'll give you a minute to contemplate that. Okay. Well, the explanatory variable is the type of hot dog, beef, meat, or poultry. And the response variable here would be the number of calories in the hot dog. Let's take a look here. In a study examining smoking habits of people, they either smoked or they don't smoke, and gender. Smoking habits and gender, what is the explanatory variable and what is the response variable? All right. Explanatory variable would be gender. Is there a difference in smoking habits between males and females? And the response would be whether they smoked or did not smoke. How about the effects of the Scholastic Aptitude Test scores on college freshmen's GPA? What's the explanatory? Which variable will explain and which will be in response? Well, let's look. SAT scores would be the explanatory variable, and the response variable would be freshman GPA. The freshman's GPA scores will be in response to their SAT scores. Okay, let's go a little further here now. Well, let me just back up for a second. So in explaining explanatory and response, we're talking about the role that the variable takes, the role. But we can also classify variables according to their type. They can be categorical or quantitative. Categorical, which is like nominal data, or quantitative. So we can talk about the role the variable plays, either here, an explanatory variable, or a response variable. And we can talk about the type of variable it is, either categorical or quantitative. So we get a little nice little model here. We have categorical variable as an explanatory variable and a categorical as a response variable. So we have categorical, categorical. So categorical as an explanatory variable, categorical as a response. Then we can have categorical as an explanatory variable and quantitative as a response. So that's another role type that we can have. Categorical, explanatory, and quantitative response. Then we could have quantitative as an explanatory variable and categorical as a response. That would be number 3. Quantitative as the explanatory and categorical as the response. And finally, we could have quantitative as the explanatory and quantitative as the response. And that would be number 4 here, quantitative explanatory and quantitative response. Now this may seem a little strange, but there's a very good reason for this. When you're reading a research article, or when you're presented with a research question that involves looking at the relationship between two variables, it's really, really important to determine which of the 4 cases represents the data structure. Is it a categorical explanatory and categorical response, or is it categorical explanatory and quantitative response, and the other, or is it quantitative explanatory and categorical response, and so on? The first step you should take in looking when you're reading research or presented with it is to find out which one of the 4 cases represents the data, because that will determine the appropriate statistical tools to be used. The appropriate statistical tools. So each one of these, like categorical, explanatory, and categorical response, there'll be a certain way to present, statistically present the information or results. And it will be somewhat different if it's categorical, explanatory, and quantitative response, and so on. All right, well, now we're going to let you take a look here. In a study looking at drivers' age, the age of drivers, and sign legibility, in other words, does the ability of a person to see signs decrease with their age? Will older people not see as far as younger people? So this is a study that was looking at that. So the explanatory variable in this study would be, and what type would it be, categorical or nominal, or quantitative? We'll give you a chance to think that over. Well, okay, let's take a look. The driver's age would be the explanatory variable, and age is a quantitative. So the role is this as the explanatory variable, and the type is quantitative. The sign legibility is the response variable, and that's quantitative also, because we'd be talking about distances. All right, how about this one? In a study looking at favorite type of music, either folk, jazz, or hip-hop, and IQ, what would be the explanatory variable, and what type is it? And what would be the response variable, and what type is that? Give you a minute to play around with that. Okay. IQ is the explanatory variable, IQ, and that's a quantitative measure, quantitative. And type of music, either folk, hip-hop, or jazz, is the response variable, and that's categorical. Would be either folk, jazz, or hip hop. Okay, let's look at the last one here. Driver's test outcome. This is the driving test. The person either passes or fails, and the length of time the person practiced. Okay, so driver tests outcome, either passing or failing the driver's test, and the length of time the person practiced. What would be the explanatory variable, and what type would that be, and what would be the response variable, and what type would that be? Okay, the length of time the person practiced would be the explanatory variable. That would explain whether the person passes or fails, and that is quantitative because we're talking length of time. The response would be the driver's test outcome, either pass, fail, and that is categorical because it's either pass or fail. Well, okay, this is the role type classification of variables, and here is the sort of model. We have response variables can be either categorical or quantitative in type, and the role explanatory variables can either be categorical or quantitative in type, and then we have the 4 different kinds. And this is really important in examining research to know what, if they're comparing 2 variables, what the role of each variable is and what type each variable is. Well, thank you very much, and we will see you next time.